Hello and welcome to this edition of Iron Sports, and I am Jermaine Brown. In this edition, we look at huge changes from the hierarchy of Cricket West Indies just before the ICC Cricket World Cup this year. And we also look at the JCA Senior Cup final, which will be contested this weekend. As usual, let us know what you think by heading to our Facebook page, Iron Sports JA. We take a break, but stick around. When we come back, we're going to be heading to the Sticky Wicket. Soon come. And welcome back to Iron Sports. On Thursday morning, Cricket West Indies President Ricky Skerritt announced changes to the coaching staff and the selection panel ahead of for the Caribbean team this ahead of the Cricket World Cup. Floyd Reefer, who was the A-team coach, well, he has been elevated now to the interim head coach, while Jamaican Robert Haynes, well, he has been appointed interim chairman of selectors. However, is this a knee-jerk reaction, especially since the West Indies did so very well against England at home recently? Well, here to answer those questions and to look at these changes are on set with me, Dr. Akshay Mansingh, regional cricket analyst, and also a sports medicine specialist. And we have online Fazeer Mohammed, regional and renowned regional cricket commentator all the way from Trinidad and Tobago. Fazeer?
Hi, good day. Good to be on the show.
All right, excellent. Let me begin with you, Fazeer, since you are online. These changes, Floyd Reefer, now the interim head coach, Robert Haynes, now the interim chairman of selectors. Are you surprised by these changes, and would you have done anything differently?
Not entirely surprised, because I think these were telegraphed by the Skerritt Shallow team even before those elections of a couple of weeks ago, which ended the tenure of Dave Cameron and Emmanuel Nantan. And clearly they had indicated that they were going to do things very, very different and very, very quickly. So at least you have to give them credit for following through on their action. However, whether or not it's a knee-jerk reaction, whether it was something that they had in mind anyway, it will be seen in some quarters as almost an act of retribution for those who might have been perceived to be on the side of the Cameron team. But the bigger issue, which you touched on in your question, is whether or not it will jeopardize the West Indies' chances of providing a competitive unit for the World Cup, because this is essentially what it's all about at the moment. And the new president, Ricky Skerritt, basically said that they felt that a World Cup was of such importance, and he emphasized over and over again this issue of West Indianness and West Indies identity, and was so important to have a West Indian presence as a coach in the World Cup. Only time will really tell if that decision is either vindicated or shown to be foolhardy based on how the team performed at the World Cup.
Right. Dr. Mansingh, let me bring you in here. Could they, let me play devil's advocate, could they have waited until after the World Cup, seeing that for the team now, they did well against England recently. Richard Pybus was only put in as interim coach a few months ago. So stability was there. So could they have waited until after the World Cup?
I think if you look at the World Cup in terms of its proximity, then clearly disrupting something at this stage is a dangerous gamble. But I think it was imperative that they had to, because they came in on the notion that things were not all well in the governance of West Indies cricket. And if you remember Director Enoch Lewis coming out and saying that the appointment of Richard Pybus was done in a manner which was not norm for West Indies cricket. Right. When you look at all the West Indian players playing around the world, excelling at their craft, but not playing for the West Indies, and you may argue when they do play for the West Indies, they disappoint, then you figure that if you're going to have a chance in the World Cup, and this is the reality, if you're going to have a chance in the World Cup, you've got to go there with your best players. Now, maybe I should say this differently. You have to go there with your best team.
Right.
The question is, will these players make a team?
Right.
Because we saw the unit playing as a team against England.
The #1 team in the world.
The #1 team in the world. But the reality is it was Test cricket where we really excelled. Yes, we drew the one-day series and we fell apart in the T20. So it was a good performance from that perspective. But I think in the World Cup, really to have a chance in England, we have to go with the best players we have, and it's up to the interim coach to make them into a team.
And how do you think this will impact the players now? Because in the long run, they are at the center of it.
Sure. I think that the players would have been spoken to, I'm sure their consensus would have been garnered before making a change like this. It'd be ridiculous if you just go and make the changes and go to the players and say, well, this is what we've done. So I'm sure a lot of consultation would have taken place, and I'd give them the credit of having done that, and therefore say that the players must be on board with this change.
Yeah. Fazer, Floyd Reefer, now the interim head coach. Was this the right choice to have someone like Reefer holding that position until the position is made permanent?
Well, given the situation, and as Akshay correctly pointed out, this was something that had been indicated, so they had to follow through on it, given the inappropriateness of the manner in which Pybus was appointed, never mind the successes that he brought. And it's interesting that Michael Holding has commented that he felt it would have been the wrong thing to do to remove Pybus, even if it was done in the wrong way, that he had actually brought success with the test series and the competitiveness in the one days. But to answer your specific question, I think really, if you look at it, if they had already decided that, look, this West Indian first thing is going to be stamped immediately with their arrival, then they had no choice. Because, as was mentioned by the president, Floyd Reefer is the best qualified. He's been associated with the team. He was actually head coach for a little while during all of the fiasco in India and Bangladesh when people weren't sure who was actually in charge of the team. And it turned out he had arrived to be the batting coach, and then Stuart Law left and Nick Portas wasn't accepted, and all that sort of nonsense was going on. Now, you add to that the fact that it's an interim measure, and based on all that you're hearing, the apology to Phil Simmons saying that he really wants to come back to give back to West Indies cricket, saying that his tenure comes to an end after the series against Afghanistan, and he certainly wants to give back to West Indies cricket. It was obvious two things, that it meant the end of Courtney Brown as chairman of selectors, because Simmons has made it quite public, his disagreement with Brown on a number of issues. And two, whatever Floyd Reefer does, short of getting to the semi-finals and winning the World Cup, he is basically there keeping the seat warm until Simmons arrives.
Right. Dr. Mansingh, let's look at Courtney Brown, the former chairman of selectors. A lot has been said about him and what he has done over the last 2-3 years since he's been in charge, but your own take on the job he was doing and whether or not he could have also been retained.
Yeah, well, apart from my take, you heard Fazer talk about Phil Simmons, and one thing Phil Simmons did say is that the selection policy seemed to have been heavily influenced by people outside of the panel, and that wasn't as independent as one may have thought or hoped. Right. And if that was the case, then clearly they were compromised and you had to make a change. And the fact that this change was made in tandem with the Pybus change shows you that I think people were not very happy with the independence of the selection panel or the non-interference from outside. And if they were so compromised, then clearly that change had to be made now.
Yeah. Is this the start of undoing everything that Dave Cameron would have done because of the differences that he had with the regional heads of government, with past players, even some of the present players?
It's foolhardy to undo everything that somebody has done. Nobody has done everything wrong. Right. But there are some grave wrongs that were done which had to be corrected, and I think you're seeing the first of that. Number two, I work at the University of the West Indies, and I was telling my Vice Chancellor the other day that as Vice Chancellor, if you alienate all of your alumni, then you've got a problem running the University of the West Indies. And as a CEO, if you don't have your top workers working for you, then you have a problem running your company. Unfortunately, in Cricket West Indies, we had alienated all of our past stars and icons and grandmasters, and we'd alienated our top players. And in that scenario, it could not have worked. So if any move is made to include them once again in West Indies cricket, then that can be seen as a good move, not an undoing of what Dave Cameron did.
Yeah. Fazer, West Indies cricket is more than just about the senior team and the players who are selected, etc. It's also about development of cricket in the region. When you look back at what Dave Cameron did since being president from 2013, are there any aspects of his presidency in terms of what he did that you would say, all right, the present president and board could retain? What aspect
the idea of the professionalization of the four-day game, which was certainly touted as one of his achievements in concert with Richard Pybus, who was the technical director at the time. It's certainly a laudable effort. But even in that, the manner in which it was done, and I'm sure you'll recall the fiasco that arose when the players, the so-called frontline star players realized that they actually had to pay in their pocketbooks for the compensation that was now going to first-class players, and they felt that they were stabbed in the back by the West Indies Players Association. They felt that there was no consultation, even if they might have agreed in principle. They had no idea that some of them were going to lose as much as 50 to 75% of their earnings to really support regional cricket. None of this was properly explained. So even in doing something that was laudable, that again, you'll have mixed reviews about, because we will certainly argue about the success of the home series against England. But if you look at some of the scores in our regional first-class competition, it begs the question as to whether really the standard is being lifted significantly with this professionalization. So in the case of Dave Cameron, so much of his leadership, whether it's been successful, unsuccessful, a huge impetus to the game, or utterly disastrous, it more or less redounds to his style, the manner in which he has done things that has created this avalanche of animosity against him, to the point where people are prepared to tolerate to a certain degree what is being done now by Skerritt and Shallow.
So it's not what he did, but how he went about doing it.
And there are parts that people are not quite aware of. For example, the professionalization is a great thing. Playing 10 matches is fantastic. Paying first-class players is great, and I'm all for that. But the way it was done, once again, it was imposed on the home boards. And what some people don't realize is that only 40% of the franchise was actually was given money for by the West Indies Cricket Board. And therefore, the local franchises were suddenly told that you've got to raise money to keep the franchises afloat. Now, it was done in a very rushed manner, and one understands later that it was done this rushed way because some people were supposedly getting bonuses because it had to be implemented by then. But if you take Jamaica cricket, for example, the Scorpions to be set up required certain legal changes before even the disbursement from Cricket West Indies could come, or West Indies Cricket Board at that time. And therefore, to prop up the franchise meant taking money from developmental cricket and putting it into franchise just to keep the first-class team afloat. So whereas you took money and gave it to the first-class players, it was at the risk of your own development. And they were told plainly that, well, it's for the franchises to raise the money. Well, the reality is that Cricket West Indies never raised enough money to even have sponsors for their first-class cricket. And so what they did is offset that effort to try and get sponsorship onto the franchises or onto the local boards without giving them enough lead time. And that led to the suffering of development of cricket in the West Indies. And that's just Jamaica cricket. I'm sure that was replicated across all the franchises.
No, the board president, Ricky Skerritt, he says that the governing body has what is now called West Indies First mantra. And he reiterated that any player who makes himself available will be looked at. Is this the way forward?
Well, I think right now it's trying to reassure everybody that they have a place in West Indies cricket. Ultimately, there's going to have to be some sort of reaching out to the players and working out some compromise, whereby you have to play some local cricket, you've got to play a certain amount of cricket, you've got to perform at a certain level, and you have to maintain a certain fitness. And so I think right now it's just giving that confidence to the players.
All right, Fazer, the squad will be announced tomorrow for the upcoming Tri-Series ahead of the World Cup. Your thoughts on some of the players who could possibly be included, especially with the IPL going on and some of our better players being at the IPL?
Well, again, it really depends on what sort of discussions would have been had. As Akshay pointed out, clearly you would think that those discussions would have taken place, and whether those players are under a binding contract and can't be released for the Ireland matches, the Tri-Series, and will be available nevertheless for the World Cup. That is the information that we're waiting on. Probably will be made clear by the announcement of the team. But clearly there is merit in having all those players under consideration, and it could very well be that they may be supremely motivated to deliver for the West Indies at the World Cup. But having said all of that, I think we also need to put it in context that the West Indies at their very strongest in 2011, a different format, got to the quarterfinals and were promptly hammered by Pakistan. 2015, with a team that was shorn of Karen Pollard and Dwayne Bravo, but still had some of the big names like Chris Gayle and Darren Sammy and a few others, again got to the quarterfinals and were beaten by over 200 runs. So there's no guarantee that having the top players in the team will automatically translate into a successful West Indies team in terms of lifting the World Cup or reaching the last four, because there's no quarterfinals this time. It's everyone plays everyone, and the top four goes to the semi-finals. So it will be interesting to see how this team is comprised and indeed the expectation of Caribbean people, because their expectations will be raised significantly if some of those headline names are included in. But again, it does not guarantee success at the World Cup.
Thank you so very much, Fazir. That's Fazir Mohammed, renowned regional cricket commentator, international cricket commentator as well, an analyst. Dr. Ashaiman Singh, thank you so very much for joining us here on IN Sports. My producer telling me that, well, that's time, and that is thumbs. But I tell you what, we have some more to come and more on cricket as well. So in fact, the second innings to come. So take a break and come back with some more.